Binary thinking is the bane of good theologians. For that matter, binary thinking should be the bane of us all, but it's not. We like to think in binary terms about our world. This versus that, left versus right, liberal versus conservative, good versus evil, light versus dark, and the list goes on and on. As he introduces the third of his 5 types, our friend H. Richard Niebuhr has a wonderful paragraph in which he addresses this very thing, this very problem of binary thinking, and it is worth reading and it's worth hearing. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Friday, July 5th, 2024. Having examined the 2 extremes of his typology, the against culture type and the of culture type, Niebuhr now comes to what he calls the Church of the Center, which he will further divide into 3 particular types. In his opening paragraph of his chapter on the third type, he offers us this gem of wisdom. He writes, "Efforts at analysis in any sphere are subject to the temptation to distinguish just 2 classes of persons, things, or movements. Rightly to divide seems to mean to bisect. Existent things, we think, must be either spiritual or physical. The spiritual either rational or irrational. The physical either matter or motion. Therefore, when we try to understand Christianity, we divide its adherents into the once-born and the twice-born, its communities into churches or sects. This intellectual penchant may be compared with the primitive, unconquerable tendency to think in terms of in-group and out-group, of self and other. Whatever its causes, the result of such initial bisection is that we are always left with a large number of examples of mixture." I think Niebuhr's dead on here. In the first place, we all have a tendency to think in binary terms about the world. Among the explanations that I find most convincing for this tendency is that it may be rooted in our very DNA as a survival technique. In a different time, human beings had to make quick judgments about who they could trust. We evolved, according to this view, to protect ourselves with the famous fight or flight reaction. As a matter of sheer survival, thinking about the world in shades of gray might get you killed. No, much better to judge strangers quickly as either friend or foe and act accordingly. But what evidently evolved as a survival technique does not always serve us well today. For in the second place, when we divide people according to strictly binary categories, we often needlessly cast others as enemies and threats who merely differ from us in their opinions. We're seeing this being played out in front of our eyes in our own country and around the world today. Political parties no longer consider each other opponents and rivals vying for votes on the strength of their arguments, but rather as enemies to be overcome and even vanquished, arguments be darned. Gone is the idea of a loyal opposition, a political party out of power but which remains loyal to the system of government and is always willing to work to achieve common ends whenever possible. Now, because we see the world in such binary terms, working together across the proverbial aisle is no longer a virtue, but a vice, which will get you, in contemporary parlance, primaried by others in your own party. This should be self-evidently a problem, but sadly to many, it's not. Niebuhr works hard to steer us clear of the binary thinking trap in his work. You can see this in his use of language in the passage I quoted earlier. When he used the terms church versus sect, he was referring to categories explored by a 19th century German theologian named Ernst Troeltsch, whose theology Niebuhr wrote about in his doctoral dissertation. Part of the problem with Troeltsch's church-sect typology is that it tended to see the church in binary terms and could not adequately account for the various shades of gray. All of which is to say, what we're going to talk about now is not only about the middle way between the two poles, but in fact 3 different shades of gray. Tomorrow, we'll get started with the first of these, the Christ above culture type. But for now, may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.